Welcome back to the Best Facts training. I hope you've been able to catch the first two sessions. In the first session, we reviewed the Best Facts acronym. If you missed that, let me just tell you quickly that the Best Facts are two words that describe two acronyms for the evidence for God and the evidence for the Christian faith, specifically for the Bible. B stands for the beginning of the universe, E, the engineering of the universe, S, standards and morality, and T, the truth about Jesus. F stands for it foretells the future, A, it's archaeologically accurate, C, it's coherent, T, it's translated correctly, and S, there's science in the Bible. We also have the Tall Tales acronyms for why not other faiths and other worldviews. We'll describe those at a later time. If you missed the first session, you can go back and get that at the Great Commission Alliance YouTube channel. I would also encourage you to pick up the Great Commission workbook called The Best Facts. This is one of our standard resources. It's available at greatcommissionalliance.org/shop. At the same link, you can also get the Best Facts tract. This is a great little tract designed for skeptics. It goes through these arguments in a very coherent and relational way, and it is a really sharp resource. It looks great. Our designer did a phenomenal job on that. Thank you so much, Megan. So anyway, that was the first session. In the second session, we dove into B, the beginning of the universe. It was a great study in the evidence for the beginning of the universe and the reality that that points to a creator. We talked about the cosmological argument. So again, as you study these things, I hope that you'll pick up the Best Facts workbook and the Best Facts tract to share with skeptical friends. You know, today we're going to be jumping into E, the engineering of the universe. In the video description, you'll be able to see a link to notes so that you can follow along and take notes as we do this training together. If you can't find it in the video description, you can always go to greatcommissionalliance.org/training, where we have all of our trainings and the resources associated with those trainings. You can definitely get the notes there as well. Let me start by reading a short little verse that may or may not sound like it has anything to do with the engineering of the universe and the argument for design that points to God. Let me read to you Matthew chapter 6, verse 28. It says, "And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin." And then in 29 it continues, "Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." And in 30, "If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith?" You know, we see in this verse something that's important to remember. That is that Jesus himself, God in human flesh, governs this universe and holds it all together. He is the ultimate engineer of the universe. So let's jump into the engineering argument for God. You know, there are very many different approaches to the design argument, but they all kind of have some similar elements. They describe the statistics and the fine-tuning and the things like that that point to a designer. You know, when we see design, we inherently believe that there was a designer behind the design. In fact, if you look at a video like this, you'll assume that there's a speaker like me speaking to you and that there was a video camera taking this video and somebody behind it all that made it happen, like our incredible tech guy, Ben. You would be right. When we see design, there is a designer behind it all. But that is a rudimentary view of the design argument. Dr. William Lane Craig does a really good job of explaining this in a logical format. And here is the first premise. The first premise is that the universe is either the product of chance, necessity, or design. We'll get into these more in depth in a minute. The second premise is that the universe is not a product of necessity. Third, the universe is not a product of chance. Fourth, the conclusion, therefore, the universe is a product of design. This is a watertight argument. It's solid, but it's more than just logically solid. It's also intuitive. We recognize this. I'll explain more about that in just a minute. But first, let me tell you about Dr. Antony Flu. He was one of the most famous atheists of the last century before the modern antagonistic atheistic movement of the last 20 years. He recently died, but before that, he went from atheism to theism. One of his last books was God Does Not Exist, and then he scratched out the doesn't on the cover and put God Does Exist. How the world's most notorious atheists came to believe in God. You know, this design argument is what brought Antony Flu to faith. It's what brought him to belief in God. So it is a compelling argument for God's existence, and we're going to go into that in a little more depth today. So let's talk about each of the premises that I just shared with you. First of all, premise number one, the universe is either the product of chance or necessity or design. This is intuitive, and I've never heard someone offer a different alternative. It's either necessity, it's either chance, or it's either design. Usually, the skeptical say it's chance or it's necessity. We're going to explain why that doesn't work in the next one. The next premise is that the universe is not the product of chance. This is very important. Statistics alone don't create anything, right? Statistics don't cause things to happen. They're just a way of understanding the probability of outcomes. And here's another thing that we have to catch here. There is no reason statistically that we should exist, right? There is no reason statistically that things should be the way they are. I'll explain more about some of the statistics behind this in a minute. But the statistical argument for the cause of the universe, that chance created us, doesn't hold water. Chance can't create anything. The next would be necessity. We're here by necessity. That'd be the next possibility. And our premise number three is that the universe is not a product of necessity, just like it's not a product of chance. There is no reason that we should be here. We don't have to be here. If we were here as a product of necessity, it would not be possible that we would not be here. There would be no other possibility. In other words, it would be naturally and inherently the absolute way that things had to be for us to be here. But we know that's also not the case. In fact, most natural laws really point in the opposite direction. They say we should not be here. Our existence is not necessary. So if our existence is neither the product of chance nor the product of necessity, the only alternative is that it is the product of design. And this is something that I think has a lot of logical strength behind it. Because the atheist, to get out of that conclusion, has to explain why it's the product of chance or the product of necessity, and they fall on both accounts. So this is a logically solid argument, but it's also intuitive, like I said a moment ago. Do you remember in Psalm 19, verses 1 through 2? It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge." When we look at creation and we see design, we naturally realize there's a designer behind it all. There was an atheist once, and we met week after week going over the evidence. We'd go over the cosmological argument, and all these other logical arguments, and creation versus evolution, and all this. And he came back after several months of me not seeing him, and he said, "I believe in God now." I said, "Really? Tell me about it." Of course, I thought it was maybe the arguments or the reasoning of the evidence. And he said, "Well, I was at a party recently, and I went out on the balcony to smoke a cigarette, and I looked up and I saw the stars." I said, "And then what?" And he said, "No, I just looked up and saw the stars." I said, "Okay, and then what happened? Why do you believe in God?" And he said, "I'm telling you, I just looked up at the stars and I knew there's a God." That is the intuitive appeal of this argument. People know when they look at the complexity all around us that this did not just happen on accident. And there's no reason we should believe it did. That is intellectually baseless. The person that says that we don't need an explanation for that is crazy. That's not being intellectually honest at all. So there's an intuitive appeal to the design argument. Let me tell you some examples of design in the universe and on our earth and in life itself. The universe seems to be perfectly designed for life on Earth, and Earth is uniquely situated in the universe. Hugh Ross shares some of the following statistics and evidences. The Earth is perfectly located in the only possible intersection of all 9 habitable zones. He includes the water habitable zone, the ultraviolet habitable zone, the photosynthetic habitable zone, the ozone habitable zone, the planetary rotation rate habitable zone, the planetary obliquity habitable zone, the tidal habitable zone, the stratosphere habitable zone, and the electric wind habitable zone. Some of the reasons to realize that our Earth was put precisely in the only place that it could sustain life like ours. As we look around at the universe, there are numerous constants and parameters, some of these from Hugh Ross as well. The distance between stars, the oxygen to nitrogen ratio in the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide and water vapor levels in the atmosphere, the ozone level in the atmosphere, the atmospheric electric discharge rate, the ratio of electron to proton mass, the entropy level of the universe, the stability of the proton, the velocity of light, and the weak nuclear force coupling constant. These are just a couple. He goes through many, many more. But if any of these were off by the slightest factor, we couldn't be here today. In other words, chance doesn't explain it, and necessity as well does not explain it. Let me give you some examples of some statistics. Life could not exist on this earth if the gravitational constant was off by 1 in 10 to the 60th power. There have not even been 10 to the 60th seconds in the history of time. So imagine something that small, a change that small in the gravitational constant, none of this would exist. Or take this one, even more outstanding, and there are many just like these. The mass and energy of the early universe had to be evenly distributed to a precision of 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. This number is so astronomically large that I can't even understand it in my head, and probably most viewers can't either. But the reality is, if anything was tweaked, even in the slightest amounts, life on this earth could not be possible, and we would not be here. So we are not here as a product of chance, and we are not here as a product of necessity. Rather, we are here as a product of design. This is true in the cell as well. My undergraduate education, my bachelor's degree was in chemistry. And if any of you have ever taken organic chemistry, you remember all about chirality. And we've all heard of the Miller-Urey experiment where amino acids were created. And the secular perspective, the evolutionist perspective that life just popped out of some primordial soup. It drives me nuts, but our Museum of Natural History here has a display. And it says volcanoes plus lightning equals life. It's the most absurd graphic I have ever seen in my life. And if you've ever taken organic chemistry, you would have to agree. It is possible for organic molecules to be created in some kind of situation like that, but that is far from the creation of life itself. You see, when organic molecules are created in nature, they're created in different-handed versions, just like right and left-handed. But to get the simplest life form to come from that, you'd need only one type to link up all together. And we're talking 100,000 amino acids and nucleotide base pairs, all with just one type without the other type getting mixed in. This is impossible out of a 50-50 mix. In fact, statistically, the odds are about 1 in 10 to the 33,000th power. This is so far beyond the realm of possibility that we can't just say it must have happened. And the statistical possibility or probability of the rest of the cell coming together, because that's not even a cell, that's just a random strand of DNA or RNA. But for the rest of the cell and all the parts that it needs, it'd be something like 1 in 10 to the 112,000th power. You'll have to get the Best Facts book to get some of those statistics and their sources, but I'm telling you today that overwhelmingly the statistics tell us that we cannot be here just as a product of chance or necessity. Let me tell you a couple quotes. Here's one from Hugh Ross. He says, "The odds that any given planet in the universe would possess the necessary conditions to support intelligent physical life has shrunk to less than 1 in a number so large, it might as well be infinity." Dembski has calculated the universal probability bound at somewhere like 1 in 10 to the 150th power, and that's being generous. These statistics are thousands of times greater than that. In other words, it is statistically impossible that life should be here or that the universe itself should be here today. Robin Collins puts it like this: the bottom line is that the universe is at least 10 billion orders of magnitude, a factor of 10 to the 10 billion times too small or too young for life to have assembled itself by natural processes. So what happens here is the skeptic appeals to a hypothetical multiverse. They say if we live in an infinite number of universes, then it doesn't matter how improbable the statistics might be, because in an infinite number of universes, even improbable statistics like these would have occurred somewhere. And since we're here, this is where they occurred. You know, you might recognize that as a blind leap of faith, something that they accuse the theist of all the time. This is the ultimate example of blind faith. We don't believe in blind faith. We follow the evidence where it leads, and we believe by faith what we believe based on a foundation of solid truth. The atheist appeal to the multiverse to get out of statistics is blind faith, if ever there was such a thing. See, there's no evidence for a multiverse. Scientifically, we can't test it, we can't observe it, we can't go to it. So we can't know it. Even if it did exist, it would need an explanation itself, so it wouldn't get the atheist out of God. But appealing to this to get out of statistics tells us a whole lot about their perspective. It tells us that they are being disingenuous when they try to refute the design arguments for God. Physicist Paul Davies says this: "There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming." Fred Hoyle, I shared this quote last week, says, and he's an atheist, by the way, an atheist astronomer. He says, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." As a response to some of these statistics, there was a movement called the intelligent design movement. A lot of universities and a lot of scientists begrudgingly tried to get rid of the intelligent design movement, saying it was just a creationist movement. You know what? They were appealing to some of these very scientific reasons and statistics in a scientific way that described the reality that there is a designer behind it all. And they were right. And they are right. It's not over by any means. So in conclusion, the design argument for God's existence is compelling. Either we're here as a result of chance, necessity, or design. We are not here as a result of chance. There's no statistical cause for the universe. In fact, the universe couldn't just cause itself out of nothing statistically. There's also no reason that we would believe that the universe is necessary, especially because nothing can't create something, like we discussed in the first beginning of the universe session. Nothing can't create something. So the universe is not here as a product of chance. It's not here as a product of necessity. So the only other option is that it is here as a product of design. This is a strong logical argument, but it's also a strong intuitive argument. You know, I think when we share this in evangelism, we want to appeal to that with people. Most people, if they're honest with you, know that you don't get something from nothing, and you don't get incredibly complex design and tremendous amounts of information from nothing. These things are intuitive, so appeal to that. You know, Alvin Plantinga called it a properly basic belief, a famous philosopher, saying that belief in God is properly basic. If you have a correct view of the universe, how could you not realize that there's a God behind it all? He was one famous philosopher that recognized these facts, as was René Descartes, and as have been many others. The evidence is compelling. We are here because of a designer, and the design we see all around us points us to that designer. I hope you got a lot out of this session. We are going to be doing more sessions. In the next session, we're going to be talking about standards and morality and how the moral argument points us to God as well. Definitely don't miss that. You know, go to YouTube, to the Great Commission Alliance Media channel, and get these trainings and so much more. Definitely don't miss the rest of the Best Facts training. Thanks so much for tuning in.